Hey everybody, welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about levers. Japanese levers, Korean levers, levers for your fight stick. A couple people on the Xbox Fighters Discord had asked me, and some folks on Twitter asked, after they saw me installing some Korean levers in my stick, which I prefer over Japanese, what the difference is, and if I could do maybe a little short review kind of breaking down the big reasons why somebody might want to switch from a Korean or why somebody might want to stick with the Japanese lever. Some people really do prefer one over the other, and it is a lot about feel and kind of just what you're used to, or maybe sometimes even specifically things you want to accomplish. In the case of, say, like a Korean lever, if you really want to do, sort of a backdash, right, in Tekken, then that is easier with the lever. Korean, well, easier in a sense, right, theoretically, with the Korean lever because of the way that it works, the way it's put together. So I thought I would do a little mini breakdown and kind of just look at the differences between the two. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on specifics. Things like micro switches we're going to talk about, but I'm not going to get into micro switches themselves in the sense of there are many different types. They have different strengths, or at least they close under different pressure more than others. I'll mention those things just kind of give you an idea, so that way if you see it, you know what to look for. But I'm not going to go into specs or anything in different specific types of switches. So stick with me, and if you have any suggestions for videos like this in the future, leave them in the comments. I'll be happy to do it. A lot of you guys have really mentioned that the fight stick videos have been really helpful, so I will definitely keep doing those if that's what you're interested in. Just let me know. All right, let's get started. So you're always getting the same precise movements no matter you're going up, down, left, right, diagonal, back, forth, right circle, quarter circle, forward, whatever it is. So this is sort of the defining characteristic. It really does have sort of a more precision based, in the sense that it's not more precise, just that it restricts your movements very precisely. So hopefully that makes sense. Something like this, like the Crown 309MJ DX, does not have a restrictor, right? So this is usually what you can tell is that the Korean levers won't have a restrictor gate on it. And some people will say, well, it's restricted in the sense that it moves in a circular pattern, right? I can move it in a circular pattern. And it can't really move beyond a circular pattern, right? And while that's true, there's no restrictor, right? The actuator here, this plastic piece, is not being restricted by anything hitting the switches, these here. And we'll come back to those. The only restriction, actually, with the Korean levers is being done at the base of the shaft, right in the neck here, the collar. So the collar is restricting because the shaft is hitting, oh, let me take this off. Because the shaft is hitting the collar, right? So yeah, I guess technically if you want to, you can call that a restrictor, but it's not. That's not its intended purposes. It just means you can't really move beyond that because you can't, based on the way the collar is designed, and nor would you really want to. So it doesn't have the same restrictor that the Japanese lever has, and so what it does is it allows for a little bit more of a freedom of movement. You can kind of hit directional inputs simultaneously that you wouldn't normally get, say, on a Japanese lever. Say, for instance, one of the big things is that people will talk about wanting to do things like a backdash, like a Korean backdash or Tekken backdash or wave dash. And what that is it requires, a back, down, back movement. And on a Japanese lever, that would get inputted as back, down, and then you would hit both, right, the directional input, so you'd hit a back and down at the same time. And here, if you do it, back, down, back, you see I'm not going to really hit that where I might here because of the way that it is, right? The way that the restrictor is kind of set up. So a little bit more freedom of movement, but what it does is that backdash allows for, basically, it's a cancel. So it's back, But then the down, right, is really, or the sort of down diagonal hitting at the same time is canceling back, right? So, and maybe that's not the best description of it, but you can look up on YouTube sort of what that looks like. It's hard to pull off without some practice, but it does have a little bit more freedom of movement. You can move in multiple directions, and you can here too. So there's not a huge difference, only in the sense that this is literally restricting the actuator and how it is moving, and then that is determining how it's hitting the switches, where this actuator is not restricted by anything, and so it's the only thing between it and the actual switch plates here, these sort of long levers, right, which are clicking, which are hitting, and then hitting the micro switch. All right, so let's look at the inside of this. I'm going to take this gate off here. And there are other types of gates. There's octagonal, which has an 8 side. They're just kind of a pain to get on. So here's what it looks like. Again, there's octagonal ones that sort of have, obviously octagonal 8 directional inputs. There are circular ones, which give you sort of more of the style here, where you can have circular inputs, which is good. And really, that's up to you. Now, a lot of traditionalists will say that the square gate is the best, right? Because you're always hitting the right percentage, just like 14%, all around. If you have the octagonal, you kind of hit 14, 14, 14, 14, but then it's like 11 in the corners. So the chance, right, the percentage that you're actually hitting that input drops a little bit, just because there's more range of movement. And same thing here, right? The percentage drops quite a bit because you have the circular, and so you could miss an input, right? But in some games or some styles of play, that is much more, it's much more desired or even necessary. All right, so once you take this off, the Japanese lever, this is what it looks like. It has micro switches, which are soldered onto a PCB, which connect to the boards, the PCB inside of the fight stick. So these are Omni switches, and as you can see, all micro switches are pretty much the same. Or sorry, not Omni, it's Omron. Sorry, micro switches, and all micro switches are the same. They usually have 3 inputs, sort of like a control, and then it's open. It's like I forget it's like OC and NC, like naturally closed or naturally open. Basically, what it means is that when this button gets pressed, right, the micro switch is, you can see it here. I don't know if you can sort of see. There you go. See, it says NC and NO. Naturally closed, right, lets it know that that's when it's being pushed, right? And naturally open means it's sort of its open state, and then you sort of have the COM, right, the control. When you push it, it lets it know that it's closed, and that it should be registering that input. And then when it releases, right, it's open. And the same applies for this Korean lever. Now, this Korean lever uses different micro switches, and as you can see these are all the 3, right? So this has the 3rd one. The one on the JFL doesn't. It has the 3rd switch is sort of this, right, on the inside, which is connected down into the PCB. You can see, right? So the 1, 2, and then there's a 3rd one inside, right? So 1, 2, and then naturally open is inside. It's not, you don't see it because of the PCB board. This one here, you see all 3, and this has a long, this particular micro switch has a long head, right, to push, to make sure you're going to hit each of those. But basically it works exactly the same, so that isn't different. Now, this is where I said I wouldn't really get into the nitty-gritty of this. There are huge differences between some micro switches. They basically, the only real difference is the pressure or the strength needed to get it into its closed state. Some of them are very quick, very open. Some of them are very tight and require much more pressure. And this is a lot about feel, about what people like, what feels natural, or what helps them maybe hit inputs in the way that they prefer. You can definitely customize. A lot of people customize and use their own switches. They'll buy separate switches and install them. Totally up to you. I'm not going to get into the details of that because that's a whole nother video for micro switches that I don't know if I'm totally qualified for. So if I can maybe get somebody to do a video on different types of switches for fight sticks, I definitely will. But inside, so let's go back to the JFL. So there's the inside, and basically the other determining factor, what looks different here, is on a Japanese lever, the base, this is what's inside, right? The shaft here, the shaft here extends beyond the board. It has an actuator here. That's what this plastic piece is. And you can see it's a little bit bigger at the bottom because that's the piece that actually hits the switches, right? It's held on by this little clip here, which I'm going to take off now. Now be careful, the clips are always on, usually super tight, and are a pain in the ass to take off, and almost always fly everywhere. Alright, so once I've done that, the actuator comes off. And this one I have a little bit, this is an extra wide actuator. You can customize this into different sizes. So that way if you want a little bit more of a movement. And when I say movement, and this is kind of what I was getting to my next point, is that what's actually happening and what the biggest difference is how the lever actually functions. Micro switches are pretty much the same, except for, like I said, in terms of strength. The real big difference between the Japanese and the Korean lever is what the lever is actually doing. When you have a Japanese lever like this, you can see that there is a base here, there's a spring, a metal spring, there's the actuator, and then on here you can see this kind of pivot here, right, that moves around. So if you have the clip on, what's happening is that when you move this in any direction, the spring is being stretched, and then when you let go, it releases the lever back to neutral. So the spring gets stretched when you move in direction, and then when you release, the lever gets pulled back to neutral by the spring retracting, right, by going back to its original shape and size. And so that spring tension, this one is particularly heavy, will determine how fast, right, or how fast it goes back to neutral, and then how much pressure it needs to actually move around. And so let me put this back on so you can kind of see it a little bit more. And this is where I think that the biggest, if you're going to talk about or think about a Japanese versus Korean lever, what you really need to think about is how fast do you want it to go back to neutral, and if you want sort of a smooth, sorry, oops. Okay, so if you want a smooth transition, or how you want, if you want a spring, right, because this is a spring. So you can see, I'm going to pull it. So the spring is being pulled, tension, and then that tension is being brought back, and it's moving back to neutral. And neutral is king, right? We know this. Being able to get to neutral is important, especially for a lot of games. Dragon Ball FighterZ, etc. So you can see with the, I think it's a 2-pound spring I have in here, tension spring. It's pretty quick, right? Because I don't want to stay out of neutral for very long, and I need a little bit more help. I'm not very good at fighting games, right? And this sort of helps, say, keep me where I need to be. All right. The Japanese or the Korean lever, on the other hand, does not use a spring, so it does have the same stupid clip. And by the way, can I just say, for for people who actually create levers, right? All you companies out there, Sanwa, others, Sumitsu, crowd. Can we fucking move beyond the E-clip, the clip, please? I hate that so much. Anyway, so this is the actuator here for the Crown 3000MJ. It's kind of thick, right? Other Korean levers say like, and I'm not really going to talk about it very much because it's so specific and it has its own thing. The golden lever is such an amazing product. I don't have one. Every time it comes up for sale, I'm unable to actually get one in time, even though it's sort of it's like my goal, right? Is to get one. The golden lever is so amazing because all of these things which you can customize on a Japanese or Korean lever, you can customize even further on the golden lever. You know, it has a customizable shaft size, it has customizable actuators, the type of actuator, the base, everything, right? So that stick is sort of in a league of its own simply because it's machined by hand and everything is customizable. You really get to determine how you want that stick to feel down to the very last detail. A lot of these sticks, you can do things like you can change the spring, or you can change the shaft or stick, the actual bat top or ball top, etc. But a lot of you can't really change down to specific feels or tensions outside of things like the spring and what I'm about to show you. So you know, golden lever, if you can buy one, get it, because you won't be disappointed. The rubber is then pushing it back into neutral, right? Springing it back. So what's good about this is that while there are different tensions for springs, rubber grommets have much more precise, or at least I think, more precise tensions, where you can get this in, say, you know, sort of 25. I think this one is the 25 or 35 tension grommet. Inside of here is actually the 45. So if I put this actuator back on and then get the stupid clip back on. Then same thing, right? So this is being pulled and the pressure is getting the grommet, the rubber, right, is being compressed, and then when I let go, it's springing back. The rubber springs back into form and moves the lever back into neutral. And I mean, just take a minute to look at that, see if I can do this at the same time. Is there a huge difference? Well, not in terms of speed. Maybe a little slower on the JLF just because it has a little bit further to travel. Part of what I like about the 309MJ DX is that it has a thicker shaft because it's detachable, so it hits that collar a little bit quicker, and so you don't need to go as far for directional input, and it kind of springs back really quick. But what you will notice is that going up against the rubber grommet is much smoother than hitting the restrictor plate. So this one, I feel like it really, you know, I have a really hard time just because I feel like it's stopping me from doing things I want to do, and that's not really what's happening. It's just that I'm not using it correctly, right? Let's be honest. But with the Korean lever, I get to kind of cheat a little bit, right? I get a little bit more of a natural feel for myself, but it means I'm also getting sort of looser inputs because of the way that I'm using it, and maybe the way that I'm holding on to it or using my hands and fingers. So, you know, it's kind of a give or take. Personally, I will say though that the rubber feels better in terms of the tension. I'm not a huge fan. The spring loses its tension pretty quickly, to be honest with you, if you use it a lot, which I do, right? I play a lot. So the 2 pound spring I already have in here is starting to feel more like a 1 pound spring, right? That's the tension is kind of quickly going down. Whereas the rubber grommet doesn't really do, I mean, it takes a while for it to really break down. So that's just kind of one of the things that I like. But also being able to customize the tension a little bit more, with a little bit more fine tuning, a little bit closer, you know, moving from a 35 to a 45 tension. For some people might not feel like a lot, but it's just enough for me to really get that kind of sense of getting a little pushback, knowing that I'm getting to the spot without getting there, so I can kind of rest and sort of sit maybe a little bit out of neutral sometimes, and then boom, move right into it. Whereas here, if I'm moving out of neutral, I'm basically going right into the input, right? There's really not a lot of room for me to kind of sit out of neutral. Now, a lot of people will say, you know, I'm doing it wrong. That I shouldn't want to be out of neutral like that. That I shouldn't want to kind of play or have this play in the area. But you know, screw those people. I like it. I like it, and sometimes it really works. So that's pretty much about it. So whether you have, say, Korean lever like I have in the Vitrix here, which is the knee lever, which you can get on Focus Attack and Arcade Shock, which has just recently come out, or if it's something more traditional like I have in the Panthera Evo, the JFL Sanwa lever, or you have something maybe a little bit different, right? Like, say, a hitbox, right? Which doesn't really use a lever, right? The buttons connect to the PCB directly through the harness, right? Either way, a lot of these choices and a lot of what we've covered are really just personal preference. What feels better to you? What feels smoother? I particularly like a smooth feel, which is why I prefer the Korean. Some people really liked the restriction of the Japanese levers, which really helps them kind of get a sense of their movements, which maybe need to be a little bit more precise. And then for me, I mean, I actually really like the hitbox too. It just, I'm not really used to that type of movement, like keyboard fingers, right? But I'm getting more used to it because I just arthritis and getting older. And there is a little bit more of my mind maybe connects a little bit more than it does with a stick. So it's really up to you what you decide. One is not going to make you better than the other. It won't. It really just comes down to feel and preference. So choose the one that's right for you, and whichever one you pick, let me know. Throw it down in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe. I'm 25 or so subscribers away from hitting that 50 mark to where I can actually name the channel something other than UE3X829 period whatever. So I'd really appreciate if you subscribed if you like the content, and if not, then I don't know, fuck off, right? All right, I'll see you next time, and hopefully I'll see you on stream.